In any case, it is noon, so we will get things started. Thanks for joining Score Main today. My name is Jasper. I'm our client services manager. I'm joined by Victoria Flynn, one of our subject matter experts on grant funding. This is Grant Funding 101, Risks, Rewards, and Reality. If you didn't know about SCORE, you're just joining us for the first time. SCORE is a resource partner of the SBA, helping clients at all stages of the business cycle, pre-start to exit. Do want to thank our sponsor today, the Maine Technology Institute, for making this event possible. And we look forward to responding to questions you may have. If you have any, already on the mind, feel free to queue them up in the chat. Or when we get to the end, we could have you come off a mute and talk to them then. In any case, Victoria, why don't you take it away?
Hello, everyone. I hope you are having a lovely day. I am coming to you from Abimi Township here in Maine, the middle of nowhere, Piscataquis, just north of Brownville, about a half hour south of Millinocket. It's pretty cold and gray where I am. So I hope you're having some better weather somewhere. I'm really excited to share this presentation with you. In my day job, I am a grant writer. I've had my own shop open for several years now. We're a growing boutique firm. It's great, but I do a lot of work with SCORE as a subject matter expert, providing free grant specific advice to nonprofits and small businesses across the state. I've had some opportunities to work with people out of state as well because SCORE is truly a resource connector nationwide, and it's wonderful. Um, but we're here today to really get into grants. And grants really, when you hear about them, they sound like free money. They sound like you're going to get a lot of money. But to me, they really sound like a lot of paperwork. And that's not just because I'm a grant writer. Um, Really, when you think about the way a grant works, it's not a loan, it's not a contract, it's not a gift. Um, as you can see on this table, yeah, you get money for all of them. Sure, you don't owe interest like you might on a loan, and you can sometimes get the money right away, but many times the award is actually reimbursed. So you might have to have the money up front to pay for something and you get it later. You get grant money later. Um, Sometimes, or often, most of the time, there's some expectation of work or outcomes, and you have to tell the funder what's been going on, what you've been doing, how their money worked in the real world, and how you put it to work. And you do that through reports that are due on a certain date. These are things that don't necessarily come into play when you are dealing with a loan or a contract or a gift. And so it's really important to remember that this is a completely different funding instrument than those. Um, Grants are a funder's investment in the projects that move their own goals forward. So instead of in looking at a grantor as a donor, it's better to look at them as another investor. They are giving you access to money, and instead of looking for looking for the opportunity to be paid back in interest, they want to be paid back in action. They want to know that something that they are invested in is happening in the real world. And you and your business or your nonprofit are the way that they're doing that. Grants are available to a wide range of applicants, not just nonprofits. And if you're here, there's a good chance that you are a small business. You may also be a nonprofit. Um, there's no category of entity that is just completely ineligible for grants. I've seen them open to many different kinds of organizations. The question really is, which ones are you eligible for? We'll get into that later. Um, Grants don't just show up and fund whatever you feel like them funding. They can fund all sorts of things, and it's not just the project that you're doing, and it's not just the training that you're looking for. They can fund buildings, they can fund research, they can fund um, new things, old things, programs that you've never tried before, research into pilots, feasibility studies. All of that has been covered by a grant for someone somewhere. So don't assume that just because you have a particular need, it couldn't be covered by a grant. Um, but grants are also only a portion of a strong funding strategy. Even for nonprofits who have the widest access to grants through foundations, it's not the only thing that they need to think about. And we've seen this a lot lately in talking about sort of the national discussion around federal funding. One of the biggest pieces of advice that's been going around is to diversify. Grants cannot be your only source of income, even if you're a nonprofit. They can't be the largest necessarily. You can't always depend on them. They are just as risky as anything else, and we've seen that through the canceling of federal grant contracts. So we have to really know what the risks are of accepting those grants once they've been won. Grants are also highly competitive. And nationally, the win rate is about 20%, and that's the biggest and best and brightest grant teams at the most spectacularly easy to fund nonprofits. And that's people who have never done it before, trying for the first time. If you average all of those wins together, you get to about 20%. And I think for the most part, grant by grant, 20% is high. A lot of grant programs, there are far fewer people winning the money, and we're seeing those buckets of money shifting and oftentimes contracting. So it's really worth knowing that this is a risk in applying. You may not get it. The odds are probably high that you won't if you just look at the statistics. But and grants are not fast, free, or easy. We've talked about that little. I'll get into that more for the rest of the talk. Um, they're not inherently flexible. If you apply for a specific thing, you are going to buy a specific piece of equipment, or you're going to put into place of a specific build out of a specific office space, or you're going to go to a specific conference, or you're going to hire a specific person. And if that plan changes by the time the money is in your hands, your funder is going to expect that you have a conversation with them because the money that they've given you oftentimes is restricted to the thing that you said you were going to do. Um, they're not inherently things where you get a loan and you can do whatever you want with the money so long as you pay it back. That's not the case here. Um, and that's not always the case with every loan either. Uh, Grants are not all big or small. There are tiny grants, there are huge grants. They are not all government funded. There are plenty of grant opportunities that could be for small businesses that are funded by economic development corporations, uh, cities, counties. Um, there are some that you may be eligible for from foundations, which typically only give to nonprofits, and not all nonprofits are eligible for every grant either. So it's really, looking at those things. But they're not all just state and federal funds. And they're also not a great reason to expand your services or programs. When we'll talk more, um, you want to really understand why you're going after the money. You really want to know that that's part of your business plan, that applying for that grant, the time you're going to spend on it, that the waiting for the money and the work you're going to have to do to prove that you use the money correctly are all worth it to your business. And that's part of the calculus you'll be doing as you decide whether or not grants are for you. So let's talk about the grant process a little bit. We start here in this red triangle, this red chevron. And the first thing you really should do is decide whether or not you're grant ready, whether or not your organization has the things it needs to start an application process, to be a strong applicant, to be a competitive applicant, to see that grant through to the end. We'll talk a little bit more about what grant readiness looks like, bullet by bullet. Once you've decided that you're grant ready, you go into prospect research. You decide, all right, I need to figure out which grants are the ones that I'm most eligible for, that are strategically well timed for the things that I'm working towards. Once you find a grant, maybe two, maybe 10 that you want to go after, you start the writing process. And you that can be a 45-minute easy fill out this application, one form, nothing really creative. It could be a 40, 60, 90 hour slog through grants.gov. It could be that you take months of time to put this application together, to review it, to rethink it, to tweak it. You may end up getting technical assistance on it. These can be anything in between. Um, and then you wait and you hear whether you're awarded or denied the grant. If you're denied, you go back and you evaluate, is this something I want to do again? Am I a competitive applicant for these other prospects that I thought about? Is there something I can do better? And then you kind of start at the beginning. If you are awarded, you move on to spending the money. You can't spend any of the money before you get the money, before you sign the contracts. But you move into actually doing the work, which means that your grant management and evaluation starts. So you are thinking about how you're spending the money, you're tracking the way you're spending the money, you are collecting data on the work you're doing, and eventually preparing that for your funder for a report. So let's talk about grant readiness. A loan applicant wants to be bankable. A grant applicant might need to be providing similar things, but not necessarily all the same things that a loan applicant needs to prove that they're bankable. So you're going to need things that that tell someone who's never heard of you before how your organization, your business is doing, your mission, your vision. You want to show that you've got strong leadership. You want to be able to prove that you have the right staff. That might mean gathering resumes of the people that are working for you. That might mean making sure that your business plan is, really filled out and that you know where you're going strategically. You're going to want to prove that your finances are in order. You're going to have, you may need to prove that you have been working towards a clear budget, showing last year's work, this year's work, your current year to date finances. You may have to prove that you have a certain amount of money in reserves, that you have reached out to other funders, that you have a certain amount of the project already funded, especially for things like capital projects where you may be going into construction. You may need to show, a grant funder that you've already got 50% of it financed or more in order to, make them feel like they are interested in signing on and taking the risk of giving you the money that will help you close that gap. You may need an audit. That's true of many nonprofits, big or small. A lot of times, smaller nonprofits come up against a big stopping point where they cannot apply for many grants because they have not yet gone through the audit process. They've been too small. They're not yet required to for their own compliance standards, so they don't spend the money on it because they can be expensive. And that may mean that they have to leave money on the table because there are plenty of funders who don't want to consider you until you've reached that level of compliance internally. When it comes to your project, you want to show, what you're doing, how you're doing it. They want to know that, you're not just saying, I'm going to put, you know, four, the equivalent of four full-time employees on this project when you only have two employees that you can assign to the work, unless you're also saying that you're going to hire more. They want to know that this work can be sustainable. There's nothing worse than having a grant-funded program that that fully funds a staff person, but that staff person isn't funded the next year when the grant doesn't continue, and you lay that person off, and then the program doesn't continue because there's no one to staff it. Most nonprofits, or sorry, most foundations and funders don't like giving to things where there isn't a plan for sustaining the hire, for sustaining the program, and sustaining the impact in the long term. And you're also going to want to make sure that you've got a culture of evaluation established within your organization. You need to know that, you need to be ready to evaluate the work you're doing. You need to know how you're going to assess that work, who's responsible for that, what numbers you're going to crunch, what are you most likely to track, what are you able to track? And also start thinking about what funders are going to want you to track. If funders are very much interested in the people you're serving, and you aren't able to capture the number of people you're serving or the demographic identity, the demographic identities of those people, then it may be harder for you to go for a grant that is specifically interested in serving a particular um, a particular segment of the population or a certain number of people from a certain area. So, knowing those things ahead of time, knowing what you're capable of and what you're not capable of will help you really determine what grant opportunities are a good fit for you and whether or not you're really ready. Also understand not all funders are going to ask for all of these things, but can't hurt to have all of these things ready and in order so that whether for a funding opportunity that's a grant or another funding opportunity, you are a lot more prepared to be transparent about where you stand and why someone should invest in your work. So, grant applications, before you start researching, grant applications require a lot of that information from the grant readiness slide. They want to know, funders want to know why they should care about the work you're doing, why the work you're doing is important in the world, why there's a need, and why you should be the one filling that need. They want a clear and concise picture of the work you'll be doing. And like I said before, this could take a long time to put together, depending on the application. And it depends on the funder. We think of federal funding as something that's really hard to go after, but there are programs that take a lot less effort than others. You might get lucky enough to get into one of those, or you might really find that, you have a tall mountain to climb, even if it's the first grant you've gone after. You also want to make sure that you're ready for grant management. Like I said before, you want to have that evaluation plan in place so that when you get the funding, you're able to think about that evaluation from the very first day. You want to make sure you have the ability to provide transparent accounting, that you are following, strong accounting practices, that you have the support you need, that you have someone who, maybe has been in the place to administer a grant, especially if you're doing something federal or state-based. Those take a lot more financial work and accounting work than foundation grants and others. You're going to have to be able to say how you spent the money, why you spent it, when you spent it, and you really um, hold some really high standards under some intense scrutiny. And you're going to have to take a few hours a week at least to keep up with reporting, to keep up with the things that you need to do. This isn't just to set it and forget it, spend it, and in 6 months I'll start thinking about how I'm going to report. You really should start to begin with, and that will make the job easier in the long run. All right, I have a couple of these myth checks as we go along. Um, there's a there's this concept that you can't get a grant if you haven't been in operation for a long time. You can't get a grant if you're new. And that's not necessarily true. There are plenty of grants out there that really focus on seed funding, that focus on pilot funding and new programs. There are funders that really care about supporting new, small, young organizations, nonprofit and for-profit alike. But at the same time, there are plenty of funders that really look for an established and known quantity kind of organization. Um, if you are newer, if you are, if you don't have a long history, if you are looking to fund a program that's brand new, look for terms like capacity building and pilot programs and seed programs. Those are going to be grants that are a little bit more aligned for your kind of work. Okay. When it comes to prospect research, you've decided to go after to start looking at things, you decided you're ready and you're ready to start looking at what money is out there. You need to know how much money you're going to need. It doesn't make sense to go after a $10,000 grant if it's going to take you $20,000 just to get the work started. You may get that $10,000 grant and not have another opportunity to close that $10,000 gap. And then the work doesn't get started. You've got to return the money that you took to begin with. You need to know what kinds of funds you need. Do they need to be restricted? Do they need to be unrestricted? What terms are you willing to take on them when it comes to how you're reporting and how long it's going to take you to do the work? You need to know when you'll need the money. It doesn't make sense to sign on to a grant program and get the application started if you need the money in 2 weeks and you're not going to hear back for 6 to 7 or 6 to 7 weeks or 6 to 7 months. You'll need to know when the work's going to start because if the money is going to come in and it's going to take 6 months to get the work started, you may not be able to report on the metrics that you had said you were going to adhere to. Um, and you need to know, who will be doing the work. You need to make sure they know what's going on, that they're going to be grant funded, they need to be reporting. And you're going to need to know why it's important to your vision, what your core operating purpose. Because going to need to make that statement to the funder. You're going to need to know what makes sense for you and what's beyond the scope of what you're willing to do. Um, and you'll need to make sure that you know why this work is important to a funder. And so you can find funders that are, filling a need in the community, or they're interested in your work because you're serving a target demographic for their goals. Did I miss anything? Looking at my notes here. No, I think I got it. Okay. So when you're looking through grants, the types of grants you are looking at fall usually into one of these four categories. There are some beyond, but usually you'll kind of look through these. So state and federal grants, the first thing you think of with these is big programs, big money, lots of competition. There are very few federal grants that are just not reaching the people that are trying to get funded. Oftentimes, they're very complicated awards. Some are for for-profits in some fields. There are more opportunities for for-profits in some fields than in others. And one place to start is grants.gov when it comes to federal, or looking at the grants that are listed on the Maine state website as well. Something to think about, of course, with all of this is the federal funding cuts. We've seen huge changes in the ways that programs are funded in every corner of the federal government. And as these changes are made, the flow of funding to states and economic development agencies, to counties, cities, towns, tribal units, all of the sources that had been um, passing this money to businesses and nonprofits, that flow is going to change. It doesn't mean that they're not going to be small business and nonprofit grantees. It doesn't mean that there won't be no access to federal money or state administered federal money, but we are going through a very unpredictable period and challenging period. Programs that you've heard about for years may not come back, or may be very competitive suddenly, where they were a little bit less competitive. And things that we've depended on sort of as an industry may disappear and may not resurface when it's time to renew a cycle. This happens every administrative cycle to some degree, but it's a particularly stark change this time, and especially considering office closures, staff changes, and more. There are really no promises right now for the future. We don't know how the priorities are going to translate to action in over the next few years, and we don't know what programs are going to come back, despite what we're hearing sort of in the media, what may end up being reworked or canceled as well. So follow what you can, but stay tuned. So foundation and corporate grants are often targeted at nonprofits, but some are going to be interested in funding individuals and small businesses. There's a hugely varied application process and management expectations across these. They really can be wildly different, and this is the place where it's very much no two are the same. A lot of times it's easiest to find these through access at premium databases. You can check your local library. You can also look through the Maine Philanthropy Center to have access to their Maine specific database for foundation grants. It's a great resource, and the Maine Philanthropy Center is staffed with very, very helpful and wonderful people. So if you are a nonprofit, this may be where you look first. You can still look this way as a small business. Um, Try not to pay into the premium databases until you really feel like you've exhausted your other opportunities in finding things, because that can be a huge cost center that you may not need if you use resources like the Maine Philanthropy Center. Economic development grants, these can be pass-through funds that originate as state, federal, or local government loans to a much more local or regional administrator. These are the place, this is more likely the place for smaller businesses to tap into national funding like ARPA. We've seen things in the state of Maine, like if I'm correct, DECD has had loans for marketing and trade shows. Um, Oftentimes, these are smaller than the grants that you'll see at the national level. We're talking 10, 20,000, but that can still be really meaningful. And it's worth watching these spaces to see, what partners are working to fund small businesses. And sign up for your local economic development council's email. That's a great place to see when these are announced, and get to know them. They will tell you what's open and they'll help you navigate those things. Professional association grants are another way you can look at things. These are a little bit better for things like scholarships and research funding when you're thinking about, taking on new training or, pursuing a new certification. It's kind of that professional development space. The range can really vary, and you kind of have to be a member to be eligible for these things to start. So you may already be a member. You may know of a professional association that would support your work. So go straight to that website and check to see what they offer and what they don't. All right, under the myth check. Eligibility guidelines are like job requirements. They'll just accept us anyway, right? Like it's fine. We have 3 to 5 years experience in this because of this class we took, because of this thing we did, because we tried that. This is definitely not true. Eligibility guidelines are one of the first ways funders eliminate applicants. If you needed to be open January 1st, 1999, and you were not, then you cannot apply. They will take that. You can apply. They will gladly accept that application, and they will reject you as a pass fail without reading the rest of it. Um, there's so much competition when it comes to grants that anything they can do to weed out applications that are just not going to make it happens very early so that the grant reviewers, the trustees, whoever it is that's going through these, don't spend the time if they don't need to. So don't do yourself the disservice of thinking, well, I can stretch this a little bit. I kind of apply. It might work. If you think that it's worth the stretch, give the give the funder a call. This is especially true for things like federal and state grants. People who, if you there's contact information associated with that program, it means that they want you to reach out and they want you to discuss this with them. Give them several weeks notice if you can, but get in there, ask these questions, say, "Hey, this is almost perfect. Does this work?" There may be a few things that they're willing or able to stretch, but there are plenty of things that are points of eligibility that any funder may be absolutely unable to bend on due to the nature of the program. This is really true for federal and state grants where there may be a law that says that they cannot accept your application if you weren't open January 1st, 1999, or if you don't have 3 years of bills showing XYZ. You have to have those things if that's in the bill, and no amount of goodwill and convincing is going to allow the program officers to let somebody sneak in unawares. So, really look at that eligibility. Don't waste your time. You don't want to spend even 45 minutes on an easy softball kind of grant if you aren't eligible. Do yourself that favor, and the grant program officers will be very glad that you avoided that as well. So, we're at the point where it's been a fire hose of information. How do you start processing this for your business, for your organization? How do you start deciding whether grants are right for you? So it's important to think about things, the risks and the rewards, and where this turns, where the balance comes in for what you're doing. So we know that your ROI is going to plummet if you don't win the grant, right? You spend 20 hours working, time is money. How many is that your time? Is that your staff's time? What things weren't you doing? What customers weren't you helping? What product weren't you putting out there when you were putting that 20 hours in? And if you don't get the grant, then the ROI is zero. And you've lost money on it. It's negative. The ROI is also low if you win grants that require more work than they fund. I always talk about an animal shelter I worked with early on in my career who had won a $10,000 grant for pet food, and they were so excited. This was transformational for them. They were pumped. 6 months in, they realized that their report has to include the age and breed of every dog that ate the food. And they did not track that. So they spent 40 hours of staff time or more recreating that data based on other records because no one had saved it as they went. No one had saved it. And that $10,000 was worth a lot less when you consider how much staff time they put in when that staff time was, they already had full-time jobs. They couldn't afford 40 hours in just a few weeks to turn around this report and comply. Needless to say, they have not gone after that grant again. A grant is a financial obligation to a new partner and their priorities. And if your priorities are changing, if you're used to being nimble and going with the flow and responding quickly, you might be in a relationship for a year or more where you're supposed to spend this money in a very particular way. And that could feel like it's holding you back. That could be actually be holding you back. You may have to fulfill your obligations before taking on a new opportunity. And you have to keep the funder's priorities at the forefront. If you are running a particular program and you realize that it would better serve a different community or a different segment of your customer base, and you want to shift the marketing to a new category, start looking at new clients, you may still have to keep the funder's priorities in place because and stay with the plan because that's what you have committed to. Um, and capacity and bandwidth is tied to the project as well. If you've said you're going to apply 2 full-time people or the equivalent to this project, and you really could use them somewhere else because there's always a dumpster fire to take care of elsewhere. Things happen. You may have to leave them focused on it, and you may have to either hire someone new or stretch yourself and other people really thin to get something else done. All that said, if you look at the rewards, that partner that can be a risk can also be a huge sort of catalytic partner. They can bring a ton of energy and experience to the role. There are lots of grants that come with technical assistance, whether you realize it or not, where they're helping you get your work done. They are having calls with you and in providing additional data or advice or just time to throw ideas back and forth and talk through changes and real world things. And they can really, those partners can be really additive and really and more important sometimes than just the money. And targeted funding and high expectations can fuel really great work. I mean, how many of us love a good deadline, love working within a box to get something done? And sometimes just that framework can help you make things feel fresh again, give you a challenge. And you just have to be the kind of person and the kind of business that can respond to that. Grants are a hugely strategic tool for many nonprofits. I mean, that could be its own that could be its own talk, that could be its own semester of grad school. um these are opportunities to really get to know people, the individual trustees, the individual donors that are working with these funders, are all potential allies in your work in bringing in more money and in sustaining yourself no matter what happens between you and the funder. I mean, hopefully this is always a positive relationship, but if the grant goes away, you may still find an ally in the trustees who is an individual with the capacity to close some gaps for you in the future. And because you worked with the funder that they work with, they know you, much better than just somebody off the street who's never had a touch point with you before. Grants are also more consistent than many funding sources. Crowdfunding can be real hit or miss. You never know whether you're going to put a ton of time into it and get nothing out of it. If you win it, you know what you're getting. Um, the no interest in repayment, so long as obligations are met, can be a really huge opportunity. And they grants can be great publicity and marketing for new opportunities and great reasons to reach out and share your work and the work of others as well. So another thing that is a common misconception is that you only need one application. You can just resend it to all the other funders. You can just put your business plan into an AI and you can make it churn out a great application and you can just send that thing to everybody and it'll just work. Once you've done it, you don't have to redo it. No. You can't reasonably recycle an entire application. You are really going to have to make sure these things are targeted to the funder that you're talking to. Just like a good cover letter when you're applying for a job is going to talk to that particular role and that particular potential employer, the grant application really does need to be targeted to what the funder is looking for, what the funder's interests are. Two applications may be very close, may actually be even be the same if the funder's missions are close enough. And you are allowed to reuse content. That's totally fine. You are allowed to put stuff into AI. The whole point is that you should be taking that out and treating it like a draft and putting it very carefully, very thoughtfully into the application and making sure, spending time, making sure that everything is really well attuned to the funder. So, if grants are for you, this is a great chance to talk to a SCORE mentor and subject matter experts about how you can make them work for you. When I am involved in a conversation through SCORE, and a potential and a mentee is excited about this and has kind of gone through this conversation, has done this evaluation that yes, the rewards are worth the risks for me. We start talking about strategy. We start talking about what can be done. We start talking about where you can look, and really, getting that process started. There are some fantastic Maine specific resources. Our fantastic sponsor of the day, MTI, has some great grants, has some great resources about grants. They are one of a great grantor for small businesses in certain sectors across Maine. MITC, the Maine International Trade Center, is also a fantastic resource. They have some grants if you are thinking about developing work beyond the United States. If you're selling internationally, if you're working internationally, they may have some great resources for you. They do administer some grants, so it's worth checking out their website. There's also CEI, Coastal Enterprises Incorporated, I think it is. I always get that slightly wrong. They're CEI online. You'll find that they have a wonderful resource, and we're going to be linking to it in the chat, that has all sorts of Maine specific grants that are really well attuned to small businesses across the state. And there are things like marketing and capital and new business, developing new business and regional things. It's definitely worth looking at. They keep it up to date. It's something I put in front of a lot of my clients as a first step. So definitely look there. If we've gotten through all this conversation and you're feeling like this might not be for you and you still need funding, there are things that you can look into that are still not traditional loans. Um, some of you have businesses and even nonprofits that may benefit from government contracts. That may be a possibility for you. A lot of times applying for those contracts is a lot like a grant application, but instead of trying to convince someone that the need exists, the government already knows that the need exists, and what you're doing is just telling them how well you can meet that need. So it's a little simpler. Um, you can also look at loans from CDFIs, like CEI and Eastern Maine Development Corp. and Northern Maine Development Commission. There are 10 in Maine. We'll be sending around a little short brief to follow up this conversation about CDFIs in Maine. They are focused on many different things. They have their own needs and in priorities, but they invest in small businesses, they invest in communities, they invest in impact driven work, and they do offer a lot of expertise in more creative funding than simply going out and getting a traditional loan. And they beyond many know many of the partners in Maine that they have worked with before across the sort of grant to traditional loan spectrum. And a lot of them have done some really amazing things, getting funding for projects that are not usual, are not typical, and they really need a lot more care. So that's definitely something to think of. You can seek investors and major donors. Sometimes that is your best and most flexible option. And you can also establish partnerships with other organizations. You can create grant eligible opportunity, um, and work with a nonprofit or work with another organization to increase capacity and eliminate the need for funding. So, there are ways to sort of sidestep this idea that, if you're not eligible for grants, you don't have access to this free money. You're going to have to go get a loan. There are other things to do. And if you fall into this grants are not for you category, SCORE is still the place, or a great place, maybe not the only place, but a great place to, ask for some help navigating what creative funding might look like for you. And you can bring up the CDFIs and any of these things to a SCORE mentor and get some advice as to how to start down those paths in particular. All right, and that's it for my presentation. I'm happy to take questions. I don't know if there have been any questions in chat. Um,
Yeah, we don't have
Jasper,
any in the chat right
okay,
now, but as you said, now's a great time if anyone does have any questions. I know that the grant process can be scary, and it was a great presentation. But
thank
if
you.
anyone has any questions, now's a great time.
Yep.
Well, if we're waiting for them to come in, I can continue the spiel a little bit about SCORE. Again, if you didn't know about us, we are a resource partner of the SBA, and we're a nationwide organization, as evidenced by Phil from New York attending a Maine-based or a SCORE Maine presentation. So we're glad to have everyone across the country here. We do have, mentors again throughout the entire country. So if you don't already have a mentor with SCORE, you can get one for free at our website, score.org. And if it's a question that may not be, able to be fielded by a mentor in Maine, one of our mentors across the country might be able to help you out. Other than that, here in Maine, we helped start over 560 new businesses in the state of Maine alone last year. So where always feels great to be a part of something that has I feel like has a tangible impact on the community. It's one of the things I always tell people when people ask me about SCORE. So Jeannie asks, can you tell us what CDFIs are again?
Sure. So a CDFI is let me see if I can get I'm just pulling up my, oh, did I think the slideshow's still up. Um, so CDFI is Community Development Finance Institution, I believe. They have funding from the federal government that already exists. They apply for it separately, and they tell the federal government how they're going to spend this money. And then they have a grant from the federal government, and then they get to loan this money out to borrowers of all sorts of different types, depending on what their focuses are. Um, and I'll put this link in chat here for which goes to the CDFI Coalition, and it has sort of a profile on some things that have been done in Maine through CDFIs. I happen to know that CDFIs fund co-ops. They've been working with, I've talked to seen presentations at several places this week, so this is a little fresh. They have been working with mobile home parks that are buying with resident co-ops that are buying the land and from developers. They've worked with independent business owners. They've worked with they help fund first-time homebuyer programs, all sorts of stuff across the state with the intention of um, strengthening business, industry, and the social fabric of our state. So they are not a typical bank. They don't have to go through the same kind of, they don't have to meet the same sort of thresholds in lending. So some of their programs may be able to fund at significantly sub-market rates. They may have very different terms than some of your typical lenders. They are going to be much more transparent about the impact that they're trying to achieve, not just the the return on the investment that they're expecting from you financially. They do mostly do loans. I think some of them have grant programs, but I would assume most of them are going to offer loans. And in Maine, there are 10 CDFIs. Eastern Maine Development Corporation in Bangor, Southern Maine Finance Agency in Biddeford, Coastal Enterprises Incorporated in Brunswick, Genesis Fund in Brunswick, Northern Maine Development Commission in Caribou, Acadia Federal Credit Union in Fort Kent, Community Credit Union in Lewiston, Totten Federal Credit Union in Millinocket, Four Directions Corporation in Orono, and University Credit Union in Orono. All have very different missions and very different focuses, lots of overlap. They have partnered together on many things. So definitely worth looking. Will the link is in the chat again, but we'll send it again in the follow-up along with a little fact sheet on them. And if you haven't worked with them, or you don't know how to work with them, again, talk to a SCORE mentor. They are likely able to connect you to a real human being there that they really want to know. They want to get in on the project early, and they want to help. And that's why they're there.
Yeah, I also included, since you mentioned CEI, I sent a link to their grant resource guide. It's a
Perfect.
great, almost magazine worth of, both nationwide and Maine specific grants with many different topics for those grants, as well as a little more information from them on stuff such as tips for applying and vocabulary around grants as well. It's a great resource that we constantly use here at SCORE, and we collaborate with CEI occasionally. They're a great resource, and the main business community is lucky to have CEI.
I also,
Amy,
oh,
yeah, oh yeah,
yeah,
go ahead.
I was gonna say I saw Amy's question about case studies in
Mm,
of grant making from SCORE. I don't think
mm,
SCORE has. I don't know of. I mean,
mm,
SCORE is national and huge, so I don't know of a SCORE specific resource on case studies
mm.
for grant making in particular.
Yeah,
Um,
it's on that topic. I mean, as I was reading it, I went on to score.org, and in our search bar there, I searched grants. And by searching in the filters of success stories, you can see some of our success stories that have received grants. So I'm not sure if that's
yeah,
exactly what you're looking for, Amy, but that might be one way to view some of our, successful SCORE clients by heading to score.org, searching grant in the search menu, then filtering by success story.
thanks, Jasper. I'm glad to know that myself.
It's what I do. It's what I'm around, what they keep me around for. Michelle says, "Thank you so much for sharing clear information and resources. Great insight. Thanks for attending, Michelle. We appreciate
Yeah,
you having you here.
yeah, thank you.
Do we have any other questions today? I know grants again. It's a big topic. It's something, again, I am our client services manager, and I do see quite a few people coming through the mentor requests that are looking for grants. So it's a pretty common topic, and a lot of our mentors are equipped to help. If you didn't quite get all your questions answered today, again, a mentor is happy to help. And it's just a quick, free process right on score.org. You enter your zip code, a little bit of information about your business, and I try to pair people within a day or two of receiving the request.
Ooh, Art, good question. I'm glad you got that in before we depart. Reimbursement grants are not loans. So, reimbursement grant is akin to a construction loan in the way in the methodology, right? So you say, I'm going to spend $20,000 on A, on B, and on C, and I'm going to spend 10, 5, and 5, right? So if you win a reimbursement loan, you don't get a check when you win. You get a contract and they say, we are going to pay once you pay A and B and C. And so you provide proof of that you've done those things, that you've made those purchases, whatever that is. Um, and, a common one that I've worked on recently is the RFSI equipment only loan for food processors. And it was really, there was open to really big equipment, and you could have any number of things so long as it added up to the right amount of dollars. But you had to tell them it's going to be this model, it's going to be from this place, here's my quote, here's the shipping. And it had to show up at a certain time, and it had to be in use by a certain time. And when the right milestones were checked off and you submitted request paperwork, you would get a check back. So in those cases, you have to have the money up front to do the thing, to buy the thing, to make sure it happens. That's the same with a construction loan. You might have a little seed money to start, but you really have to have some capital to get to the next point. And then once you get there, the next tranche is released, right? So you have to really know how that reimbursement is working. You have to plan ahead of time, and you have to have enough money to cover any incidentals. If you order this big piece of equipment and suddenly tariffs and you have to pay more money to get the thing into the country, you're going to have to pay that money up front, and that may not be adjusted. You may not get more money based on your contract. You're still getting that first $10,000, even though the cost of the equipment has gone up, the cost of transport has gone up. So reimbursement grants can be really tricky. It's one of the reasons that having somebody with some expertise in that on your team can be really helpful. Whether that's an employee, a consultant, even a score mentor who's able to just help you navigate it, possibly legal expertise, possibly your tax person, or all of the above. So that's those can be concerning, but they are also fairly standard. And once you're in them, so long as you're really carefully following the terms, you can they are navigable. It's just they take a little bit more work.
Yeah, great info to have on that one. Well, anyone else with a question before we get going here? Before we head out, that is. Amy says thank you, and Art also says thank you. Lots of thank yous in the chat. We
Oh,
appreciate you all.
I'm so glad you guys enjoyed it. And hopefully it doesn't feel like too much of a fire hose or discouragement. It should hopefully, help you get to the next stage in wherever you are. So,
Mm, absolutely. Yeah,
yay.
bring it
I
on.
approve, Hillary.
Yeah. Well, it's what we're here for at SCORE. Again, one quick thing, one more time. If you aren't already working with a SCORE mentor, it's a fast and free process right on score.org. And other than that, as I said in the chat, we did record today. Once that recording is available, I'll be sending it out to everyone who registered. So if you missed anything, you can peruse that at your leisure. It'll be in our YouTube channel that also houses a lot of our previous recordings, lots of interesting topics on there. A recent interesting one on AI for your business, as well as certain bookkeeping practices are on our YouTube channel as well. Other than that, I want to thank everyone for attending today. I want to thank Victoria for a great presentation. And I want to thank our sponsor, the Maine Technology Institute, one more time for helping make today's event happen. And last but not least, I want to thank everyone for attending. You all have been great. We appreciate you. We wouldn't be here without you. Thanks again, everyone. I'll be wrapping it up and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.